Morning. As you can see, making this cup of coffee can be kind of complicated. The key to making that easier is also the key to making practicing piano simpler. So the concept that I'm going to be teaching you in today's video is called chunking. Now you might be wondering, why is it important to understand this idea? Well, if you think about the way that we process information, both visually or even mentally, like we need to be able to chunk it. We can't just absorb it all at once. If you think about the typical 10-digit phone number, we don't just see 10 numbers in a row. We have the area code, we have the group of 3 digits, and then we have the group of 4 digits at the end. And it's also the same thing with reading. If you see a sentence, we're not seeing a bunch of letters in a row. You have to divide them into words for it to make sense. This idea is so important that it's literally the very first thing that I teach any new student I have. What's cool is that once you understand this idea, you can use it to practice anything such as scales and arpeggios, or even something that's not piano related, like trying to cook a recipe. For the purposes of this video, we're just going to stick to songs or pieces. And by doing this, you'll get better at understanding form and also understanding how to practice well. So I'll see you guys later this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. So next we're going to be taking a look at musical examples from beginning all the way to early advanced. And in the very last part of the video, I'm going to be showing you something beyond advanced, something that's at the concert level repertoire, in my opinion. You can call it virtuoso or just super duper hard. So these musical examples, except the very last piece, come from the Faber Studio collection. If you're interested in this series, take a look at the links in the description after the video is over. I've also picked songs, meaning that there are words and verses in this music. It's just much easier to learn the concept of chunking this way. And this is also what makes learning classical music and instrumental music so difficult. And no matter what, I suggest you watch this video in order. No matter how advanced you are, if you skip ahead, you're going to be missing a key piece of the entire puzzle. Now here's a useful metaphor that's going to help you understand chunking. I want you to imagine a scenario. Imagine that it's your very first lesson with me. One of the very first questions that I ask every student at their very first lesson with me is, how do you practice? And if it's you, how would you answer? You might say, oh, I just play a song, or I play the music. Or maybe you don't even have an answer because this is a question that you've probably never been asked before. I would tell you that practicing piano is like eating a pizza. How do you eat a pizza? Well, unless you're a competitive eater, you're not gonna shove the whole thing into your mouth. You're gonna eat it bite by bite. And even if you eat it bite by bite, it's not like you take the whole entire pizza and eat it bite by bite. You have to divide it up into slices. So practicing music is the same way. I want you to think of every piece or song that you work on as a musical pizza. Now in the very last part of the video, when I show you that super duper hard piece, we're not going to use this example. I'm going to show you a different concept entirely. Now here's the first song. I'm sure you all heard that tune before. It's row, row, row your boat. So how many slices are in this musical pizza? How many different chunks do you hear? And if you can't figure it out from that, remember, it's a song, so we could just look at the words and the verses. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. So I'll play it on piano so you can hear how each one of these chunks sounds. There's 1. There's 2. There's 3. And 4, the last one. Once you're able to divide up whatever you're practicing, then you're actually going to just practice each chunk at a time. You don't practice the whole entire song. It's much more efficient this way. Now here are some practice tips that are going to apply at every level. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you connect at least one note / word into the next chunk. So if I played it from the beginning, see, it's one more note into the next part, and then so on. Because if you don't do this, you're going to have to waste time actually connecting it. So this is a real time saver. Now, let's say you're practicing this much and you're still having a hard time with it. I've gone so far as to even teach students one note at a time. So we shorten the whole entire phrase into one single note. So if you have to, just build it up from there. And once you have your first chunk, then it's a matter of just connecting it to the next part. So for instance, the verse slice, and for the purposes of this video, let's just call them chunks from now on. You're gonna connect chunk 1 to number 2, number 3 to number 4, and then you have the whole entire song. The last thing I wanna say before we move on to the next song is to not focus on being perfect. You gotta have a lot of patience. It's gonna take a lot of time. And the more you focus on perfection, the longer this is going to take. Next up, we have Jingle Bells. So how are you going to practice this? Well, exactly the same way we practice row, row, row your boat. The only thing that has changed is that it's a bigger pizza. Think of it as your appetite getting bigger. It's code for your concentration improving. You're able to pay attention for a longer period of time. Now, if you listen closely, you can notice that we still have 4 measures. Each one of these verses equals 4 measures, that is. But there are going to be at least 8 verses in this song now. Let me count it for you. Dashing through the snow in a one-horse open sleigh. Over the fields we go, laughing all the way. Bells on bobtail ring, making spirits bright. What fun it is to ride and sing a sleighing song tonight. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. So you see we have 8 verses. You can think of it as 8 slices of this pizza if we're continuing on with that metaphor. If you want a sample of how you would practice at least the first page, this is what you would do. So still connecting to the next verse. This is the start of number 3. And then the last one we have here. So I hope you're starting to understand the picture here. Now, next up we have what I consider an early intermediate song. And let me get the laptop out because I don't have this one memorized. This is Be Our Guest. So here it's still 4 measures at a time. You can kind of hear from the beginning. And of course going into the next part. So that's 2 chunks down. And so on. So it's much the same idea as with the previous 2 songs. Now what I want to say about this is I was playing 8 measures at a time because that's the way I hear every chunk. So although there are much more verses than that, that's what I chose to do. But of course you can feel free to adapt this approach any way you want. So if you want to split it into 4 measures or even less than that, remember that that's okay. And as you improve, as you start to tackle more difficult pieces in repertoire, these are the choices that you're going to have to make. Alright, let's get into the next song, which is now early advanced. So you've just heard Meet the Flintstones. Now this is an interesting selection because sometimes when you're chunking it, you'll find that each chunk isn't exactly symmetrical. And what I mean by that, it might not be the exact number of measures at a time. For instance, I'll demonstrate in this song, each one of these chunks can be a different number of measures. So if we take the beginning, So right there, I actually took it with the repeat just because it's easier to count that way. That was about 10 measures that I played. So you can think of it as a 5 measure chunk and another 5 measure chunk. However, let's see what happens when we continue on. So even though I stopped at the next note of the next chunk, what you heard was a 4 measure phrase. And the very last chunk that I'm gonna play for you here is 6 measures. So if we're going to number that up, we have 5 measures, then we have 4 measures, then we have 6 measures. So you'll find examples of this in more complex pieces or songs, and this happens all the time in classical music as well. Before I show you the last example for today, if you skip to this part, remember, go back from the beginning, watch it from there because you're probably missing some very important information. So the last piece I have for you here, which I'm very happy to demonstrate today, is called Chou à la crème. And this piece is by Hiromi Uehara. She's my favorite living jazz pianist today, and after you hear this, you'll probably understand why. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, this is what I consider virtuoso/concert level repertoire, meaning that I think this is capable of being played on the professional stage by any concert pianist or professional musician. Now I'm actually only going to play the first section here because the whole entire piece is about 6 sections long. It's about 9 pages. That might not seem a lot to you, but there are a ton of notes in here and I'm trying to keep this video as short as possible. Okay, so I told you I was going to show you a different concept to apply to this one, and here it is. It's called the macro versus micro concept. This whole entire section that I just played, think of it as the A section. We're gonna call it the macro. Another way to think about it is global. And now I'm gonna proceed to divide it up into 3 micro sections. You can also think of that as local. And I'm just gonna label it A1, A2, and A3, but you can use whatever you want. If you don't like letters, you can use numbers. For instance, you can call this entire macro section section 1 and proceed to label it 1A, 1B, 1C, whatever floats your boat. So here's A1. Apologies for the squeaky bench. I'll try to keep it down. And now we're going to A2. Not perfect, but let's keep it going. One thing I want to say, I technically took the first 4 measure, or I think 8 measure intro, and and I just connected into the next part. I also want to emphasize it's not like I just started out like this. This music is incredibly difficult if you can't tell. So sometimes I would practice really one measure at a time until I built it up into a 2-measure chunk, 4 measures, and you get the picture. And once each micro section was good, I practiced connecting that into the entire macro section. And I repeated this process for every single section in this entire piece. A process that basically took months. So you get why I'm telling you to be patient with this. Now, if you want to take a look at an easier demonstration, something that might be more appropriate for your level, I highly suggest that you click the links in the description. I use this concept to show how to play Sonatina in A minor by Anton Benda. And you can also see the results of this way of practicing. A full performance of Chou à la crème is also included in the description. Remember, it's the same question at every level. How are you going to divide this into chunks? It gets harder to figure out at the instrumental level and more difficult music. And the only answer I have for you is you have to just get a lot of experience, a lot of practice, a lot of listening, and eventually you'll begin to understand. So to summarize, practicing and learning piano is incredibly complicated. Chunking is one way to help simplify that. And by doing so, you'll begin to understand form as well as practicing more efficiently. Remember that this applies at every single level. Use the pizza metaphor from beginning all the way to early advanced and beyond. You can think of the macro versus micro section concept. And this is just one way to use chunking. There are so many different ways we could use this idea. The possibilities are just countless. But I wanted to keep this video short, and in possible future videos, maybe I can show you some different ways to use this incredibly useful technique. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you liked it, if you learned something today, hit the like button. If it's your first time here, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this video. I'll see you guys in the next one, and happy practicing.